Okay. Senator Johnson, also known as Dr. Johnson here. So.
Apparently.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Cobert. I'd like to join Senators Carper and Senator Cobert in just thanking you and your family for your willingness to serve. I think this is just an absolutely fascinating nomination. I commend whoever found you, and Sylvia. I mean that's fabulous. I'm looking forward to our meeting tomorrow.
Great.
Your skill set is exactly, I think, what this government needs across the board, and I'd like to see hundreds of people with your background. You listed the number of different areas that you've consulted on. I'm interested in just having you describe what your process was when you'd go into a business, and you talked about a small team trying to make large-scale impact. I mean, there's nothing larger scale than this as a financial entity, and the task was really overwhelming. So can you just tell me what your process was and what your process will be?
Sure. Thank you for the question, and thank you for your kind words. Let me try and describe some principles about how I've tried to work at McKinsey and maybe illustrate that with one example that might be helpful here. At McKinsey, we have a number of principles that underlie our approach to any problem. One is being clear what's the objective we're trying to deliver against. What kind of performance are we trying to deliver for customers, for the business, for the people who are working in that business? So we start with a clear objective, because that's the objective that's going to drive our recommendations. There's then a process of looking at data and formulating hypotheses. What are some alternatives for how things can work, and what are the facts going to show us? We then spend a lot of time thinking about data. That data can take the form of understanding financial performance. It can be understanding feedback from customers. It can be looking at changes going on in the economy. So you can understand what the actions might be involved and what the costs and benefits might be. And finally, there's a process of testing alternatives, building recommendations, and importantly, once you have a set of recommendations, developing a set of metrics where you're going to measure performance. You're going to be dogged about coming back again and again to say, what did we do? Did it work? Is it delivering the way we thought it would? And if not, what are we going to do to change things? I can think about an example of a telecommunications company I worked for, which was plagued with problems of when they were signing individuals up, phones were coming back, customers weren't satisfied, people would then drop the service. So they'd gone to all this trouble to bring these customers on board, but they got them on board and then they left again because the process of getting them engaged didn't work. It involved lots of different parts of the companies. You had to find out what was happening at the front line at the store when people walked in. You had to find out why things were sometimes getting delayed in getting their service turned on. You had to find out whether you'd actually put them in the right contract in the first place, one that really fit their needs, because if they ended up in a program that didn't work, they then were either paying too much or not getting the services they really wanted. We did that through a process of working with individuals from all those different parts of the organization. We had people from the finance function, we had people from the front line, we had people from the call centers who were getting the calls from the angry customers. We had people from the logistics group who was actually supplying phones back and forth. And what we tried to do in that case was get a picture of the process end to end from the view of the consumer. What was the customer seeing? What was working for them? And how did we start to measure it in a way that took it from the customer's perspective? Each of those individual groups were trying to do their job well. Someone was counting whether they were putting the data in accurately, but they didn't know what happened when the data left their shop. So what we did there is say, how can we bring this together? How could we collectively redesign a process? And in this case, how could we put in new metrics? Metrics that weren't just about getting phones in people's hands, but having those people 30 days in, 60 days in, still be customers and to be highly satisfied customers. So it's that mix of the end product, which was keeping customers, getting them happy, the data from the different places, getting people to own that, and then having something to measure at the end to see if you were being successful.
I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but to me it sounds like you're describing a basic strategic planning process. I mean, would you go in there and did you have a basic strategic planning process that you'd implement kind of first thing out of the blocks?
Yeah. There's a strategic planning process, which you then translate into operational activities, which you translate into a budget. So it's that whole cycle, and then into performance metrics and evaluation.
It was interesting, you said you first started with objectives. And I guess from my standpoint, that would be the second step. I mean, really isn't the first step in the strategic planning process trying to ascertain reality and really getting the facts on the ground. I don't want to quibble with you, but I think it's somewhat important in terms of my next question.
Sure. I think both of those go together. So it has to be iterative. When we think about objectives, they're pretty broad objectives as opposed to the tactical objectives. So they do relate to the context. And again, I think it's important to be iterative. As you learn more about the context, you can go back and check those objectives. So this process of sort of learning and feedback is very much embedded. So we find sometimes it's helpful to start with where do we think we want to go, how do we adjust that, and then how do we refine it before you make a firm commitment. So the two go together.
Okay. From my standpoint, we're dealing with, the reason I came here, and by the way, pretty similar business background from the standpoint of a number of years in the private sector, then all of a sudden being here. We're dealing with fiscal situation here. We're dealing with financial problems. It requires numbers. And if there's one thing that has driven me nuts as an accountant, is the inability to come up with a common set of numbers and being able to just get information. So I guess that's my next question. Do you basically agree with that assessment? Is that going to be a primary goal of yours, is trying to describe our problem numerically?
I do think having reliable data, reliable financial data, as I said earlier, is a critical priority. You need reliable data. And I think there have been a number of efforts underway to try and make that data more available, more visible to the public. I've also found that as you use data more, as you use it to make decisions, the individuals who are generating that data begin to even more recognize its importance, depend on it for reliability. If people are going to use it to assess their performance, if someone's going to hold them accountable, their interest in having accurate data to start with gets much higher. So I believe there's a lot of value there. I know there's been efforts on that, and I know that there's more to do.
Okay. Again, I'm just looking forward to working with you. Just my final comment is, if you're going to solve a problem, you first have to admit you have one, and we don't have enough people in this town truly admitting the depth of our problem. And then secondly, you have to accurately describe it. You have to define it. And from my standpoint, we're not dealing with just a 10-year budget window problem. We really are dealing with a 30-year demographic problem. We've made all these promises to the baby boom generation. We did not make adequate provision to pay for them. So I've been working with the White House trying to define this over 30 years. What is our long-term debt and deficit issues? And I'm hoping that you'll work with us to come to a common understanding in terms of what the depth of that problem is, and then start trying to format the solutions. I keep calling it a solution menu. Just putting in options so we're actually dealing with real information, not demagoguery, but describing this with real information. And that's certainly what I'm looking forward with your background. I think you're in a perfect position to work with us to do that. So thank you.
Thank you.